Journalist Anton Harber has released a new book, and this one delves into his own profession. The book, So, for the Record, looks into police death squads, rogue units, renditions, and the Guptas. But more importantly, it focuses on how the media can be duped into doing a regime's bidding or work. He spent 2 years interviewing politicians, journalists, and policemen, and has resulted in this book that I tell you is a scathing indictment of the media. Anton Harber, good afternoon to you and welcome. Something changed in the climate of journalism during the Zuma years. What was it?
Well, that's very interesting. It really saw the media take sides on one side of the divide for or against Zuma and state capture and what he represented in a way that polluted, I think, the heart of our journalism. So it was a time in which we saw the best of journalism in some of the exposés that took on state capture, but also some of the worst. And the case I look at most closely and try and take apart, because I think it tells us a lot about journalism and our journalism, is what happened at the Sunday Times that led them to retract and apologize for 3 key stories.
It talks to the climate in newsrooms. Do you think that do you think that newsrooms themselves were maybe ripe for the taking at that point? What was the climate, the environment that existed in order for this kind of thing to happen?
Well, you know, those who were trying to capture and to mislead these newsrooms, the spies and the spooks, basically, they tried it at a number of publications. So the question I had to ask is, why did the Sunday Times go along with it or fall for it when others didn't? A lot of it has to do with the financial and political pressures on newsrooms. But I argue that there was a particular practice and culture at the Sunday Times, deeply embedded in the way they worked and built up over many years when it was the most powerful newspaper in the country and by far the biggest newspaper in the country, that led it down this very unfortunate path.
So we have a breakdown then in newsroom systems. Do you think they still exist? Do you think that anything's been fixed?
And that's a very good question, because, you know, in 2007, the Sunday Times had another series of terrible stories, and I was part of a panel that looked into it and made recommendations to them, which I don't believe they implemented. And then they had this problem again 10 years later. And they've said that they've taken steps, they've done certain things, but if you want my frank view, they haven't done enough to change those deep cultures and practices in the newsroom. Not just them, but others, but the Sunday Times was where the problem was particularly acute.
Do you focus on someone called Johann van Logger? Who was he? How was he maligned? And you reference in a chapter his trial by media.
He's an extraordinary person who I got to know in this process. He was a key person in the SARS investigative unit, what became known as the Rogue Unit, which first burst onto the scene when the Sunday Times wrote up a love affair he was having with a lawyer in the tobacco industry who was also on multiple payrolls, working for the State Security Agency as well. And I must say, it looks very much like a honeypot planted by the tobacco industry to get SARS. That's where the story started. But the Sunday Times then ran with Van Loggenberg's Rogue Unit, accusing them over time of running a brothel, bugging the president himself, and really breaking all rules and conventions and the law. He is an extraordinary man himself, I must say, and I describe him in the book. He has the qualities of a great investigator. He's meticulous, he's relentless, he's obsessive, but that also makes him quite a complicated character. And I described, for example, one day when I asked him a question, and he sent me 74, I think it was, WhatsApp replies over the next 12 hours. That's the kind of obsessive he is. And of course, his life was ruined by these many quite absurd regulations and the labelling of his unit as a rogue unit.
You talk about, Anton, how the profession failed, but there's also the good, as you say. And then you get to the importance of the Gupta leaks and the astonishing work that was done by some organisations. To some extent, that maybe vindicated the profession, I wonder.
I think it did. I think it showed that we still have the great potential to do good, more good than harm, that we still can do some great journalism in this country. That was world-class journalism, Gupta leaks and the way it was handled, and it contributed to ending a presidency, and a remarkable bit of forensic journalism, I must say, by those involved. And the story behind it, how it came out, how they managed it, how it got to the Sunday Times preemptively and beat the people who had it at Amamungani and Daily Maverick, the businesswoman who was involved in funding, who let them down and who they're very angry about. I think it's a fascinating story behind the story of Gupta leaks.
If the profession has lost the trust of the public, which is true, perhaps not entirely, but certainly elements of it, are we able to recover that trust? Because that is the currency that keeps us afloat as a profession.
Yes, we have. I would say that certain elements, certain outlets, certain journalists have lost trust, but others have built it up. But it does all drive home how precarious that trust is, how we have to look after it at every turn, how we have to be absolutely protective of the trust we have with our audience, our readers and our viewers and our listeners, and how rigorous and professional and careful we have to be to have what is our greatest asset, which is the trust of the public. Some journalists in South Africa have it. Some had it and lost it. But yes, it's a slow process. One builds it up and one has to protect it through the utmost professionalism.
You also make the point, don't you, that a lot of this has taken a physical toll on people in the newsroom. It's affected their health.
There's no question. You know, I was very struck by the fact that everyone I spoke to, every single person I spoke to who worked in the Sunday Times in that toxic period was deeply damaged and hurt. The editors, Felicia Opphout and Ray Hartley, the journalists who did the story, deeply scarred by their experience in that newspaper. And some of them, their lives torn apart because, in some cases, because they messed up badly. And I think the tragedy is that some of them still don't accept and see how wrong they got the story and how misled they were.
The book is called So For the Record, Behind the Headlines in an Era of State Capture. The author is Anton Harber. Thank you very much indeed.